the types of citations, and this is again data from 1998 until 2001. The largest size is undersized fishing. So a lot of people, you know, they have a lot of trouble confusing the species. They don't know how to identify it, so they might think that a particular size limit is for one fish when it's really for another one. So that's the main reason why people get in trouble. Without a fishing license, that's another issue that we encounter a lot in Miami. So part of the class actually we spent on educating them about who needs a fishing license, where to get it, how much it costs, whether they have family members coming and do they need a license or not. So we also spend a lot of the time doing educating them about how to get a license. In terms of the size limit citations, snapper seems to be the most popular one. So we spend a lot of time talking about snapper as well as the grouper species. And in terms of bad limit, the snapper also seems to be the most popular one when it comes to that fishing violation. Something that we have observed and that we're trying to now educate the rangers about is that when they report the fishing violations, they just say snapper or grouper. They don't specify which species, so that's something that we're going to try to change in the future to better reflect what is going on. The reason why we want to do that is because if we see that a particular snapper is being targeted by the population, then we can tailor the class to reflect that. So the breakdown of the course, during the introduction, we educate the people about the different parks and the different resources and why the fishing regulations are necessary. So we talk about anecdotes about how it is a lot difficult, how the sizes have changed because more and more people are competing for the same resource. After that, we have the fishing identification portion. And we don't cover all of the species in the park. It would be impossible. We would need a lot more than 3.5 hours. So we target the species that are most popular with the people who attend the class. So we tell them how to read markings. We tell them about colorations, different characteristics in the fish that they can follow when they need to go ahead and follow the regulation. So after we teach them about how to identify the fish, we go into the actual regulations. So we give everybody a copy of the most recent fishing violation manual or pamphlet, and we go one by one. We spend a lot of time on this section. This is where most of the people have questions with. You know, they'll put a lot of different scenarios out there to see how the regulation will work with that particular scenario. So we spend a lot of time here because the main part of the class is for them to avoid another fishing violation. And the last portion of the class is, you know, how to do catch and release safely and ethically. And you know, and this is the part that they seem to like the most. Captain Moratory, he brings out his gear. He talks about different hooks, different lines, and how to do it. Which parts of the park are better. So they seem to get a kick out of it. They really enjoy this class. And like I said, this is done within a 3.5 hour period. So I don't know if is that? 10 minutes, okay. So the introduction of the class, we talk about, like I said, the background on National Park Service. We define the park boundaries. We also regulate how fishing is regulated in South Florida, and we teach them. This is one of the actual pictures that we tell them to sort of show them that the active and the productive areas of the ocean are quite limited, and that they're mostly close to the coastal areas where most of the population in the world tends to live, and therefore you have a lot more people competing for something that is quite limited. Fishing agencies use data as a point of reference to establish fishing regulations, and that's what we try to teach them about. We don't tell them. We try to educate them about how the regulations are not arbitrary. That scientists actually use data, collect data, and use the data to tell us about the health of that fishery. So here are some of the pictures that we show them to educate them about how, because there are more and more people fishing, the size of the fish has tended to decrease. So we have pictures to show them a change on the size of the fish, but we also have some data to show them as well. This is data from Biscayne National Park. This was done by one of the professors at the University of Miami. They have not collected data recently. The last time was back in 2000, but he wanted to look at the size of hogfish, which is very popular in South Florida, and how the size of hogfish has been affected by regulation. So one of the things that they noticed is between 1975 and 1985, the size of hogfish kept decreasing. However, late in the 80s, once the regulation for hogfish was enacted, he was able to see in the data that the size of the hogfish kept going up as a result of that regulation, the size regulation. In the fishing identification portion, if you see the sport fish of the Atlantic, that's the book that we give the participants. It's quite extensive. It has really good pictures so that they can look at the markings and the different shapes of the fish, so that they can take that with them and compare it to their fishing regulations, and they can become more familiar with the different species. So we review the basic shapes and markings of the fish. We point out different characteristics that they can follow when they catch a fish in South Florida. Something that we tell them is that once they catch a fish, they have to identify right away, because once the fish is under stress and is out of the water, some of the markings are going to change. So we tell them what to look for when they have to identify a fish. So an example that we give them is this picture right here. And I don't know if any of you is familiar with fisheries here in the East Coast. I don't know if you happen to know what type of species this is. Does anybody know?
Anybody?
All right, this will be a mountain snapper. And when we ask the participants to identify this snapper, the first thing that they tell us is that they notice that dark spot on their skin. However, here in South Florida, there are two other snappers that also have a very similar mark. So if they only follow that mark, then they're going to have a lot of trouble, because the three different snappers have different size limits. So we tell them, in this case, to actually look at the pointed anal fin, which is something that does not change with whether or not the fish is underwater or is out of the water. So we just give them little tricks that they can follow that will make it easier for them to identify the different species. They also, okay, so let me see if I can. Another one that is popular here in South Florida is the pompano of the permit, and there's three different ones. It's the Florida pompano, the permit, and the African pompano. And we tell them how to identify them. So for instance, the Florida pompano, they have spines in the front of the dorsal fin. It has no spines at the bottom, whereas the permit, it'll also have spines anterior to the dorsal fin. However, they will not have any spines. Compared to the African pompano, who will have this spines after the dorsal fin, and it does not have any spines at the bottom either. So when we talk about the reasons for the regulations, we talked about how to read the pamphlet, like I said, how to differentiate between the size limit, their purpose, and how to measure a fish. We also talk about the bag limit and the purpose for that, why we have closed seasons and closed areas, and the protected species and why they're protected. We talk about other violations that could happen in the park, for instance, as a result of grounding, or if they're boating too fast and they cut a line between a buoy and a lobster trap, how that results into a violation. And the emphasis is placed on how to interpret and understand the regulations. And again, the emphasis is not on them memorizing the regulation, because they change every 6 months. So this is just to give you an example. So for instance, snook, which is one of the species that is very popular here in South Florida, we tell them how to read the different symbols and what do they mean. We go over the size limit. Then we talked about the close season. And we tell them about the daily bag limit per fisherman per day, and any other special remarks. So, you know, do they need a special license, as in the case of the snook? Can they sell it? Can they not? What anything else that they need? Anything else that they need to know about it? So some of the common size limits that we go over. Like I said, we stress a lot on the snapper because that seems to be the species that we see is most of the violation. It would be 16 inches total length, so that's something else that we need to teach them, whether to measure the fish in its entirety, or just measure from their mouth to the fork, where the fin bifurcates or separates. And here's a hogfish, if you've never seen one. And for the hogfish, it would be 12 inches fork length, which would be from the mouth till that separation on the fin. The reason why we emphasize the size limit is because with scientists use size to estimate how mature that fish is. So just to give you an example, as a red snapper that is 16.5 inches in length would release about 44,000 eggs. However, a 24-inch red snapper would release 9.32 million eggs. And if you want to know how long it takes for a snapper to go from 16.5 to 24 inches, is estimated to be between 1.5 years to 2 years. So not that long. So people might think, you know, a 16.5 is releasing 44,000 eggs. So that seems to be quite a lot. Why can't we catch them then? Well, what happens, as you'll know, you know, the fish will release the eggs. However, those eggs are going to be exposed to a lot of environmental stressors. You know, you're going to have other species that are going to eat that fish. They're going to be they're going to go somewhere else, the different currents. And it is estimated that about only 0.1% of all the eggs that are released survive. So that's why we tell them, you know, the bigger the fish, the more chances that they'll have to reproduce and have a sustainable fisheries. Something else that they find quite interesting is that if a fish wants to change gender, they don't have to come to Miami or pay a surgeon to have a sex change operation. They do it naturally. So for instance, with the grouper, when they're bigger, they're male. When they're smaller, when they're small, they tend to be female. When they're large, they tend to be male. So when we have those slot, what they call that slot regulation, where it says, for instance, with the snook, it's no less than 28 and no more than 32. The reason why we have that regulation is because we want to have both sexes represented in the environment. So we don't want people to catch all the bigger ones, because then, in the case of the grouper, you'll be catching all the male ones, and then we won't be able to have, like I said, both men and female represented. So we also give them examples of how to follow the bag limits by group and also by species. For instance, here in South Florida, they're allowed to capture up to 5 mangrove snappers. So we give them the example. They're out there, they're fishing, they have their 5th mangrove. If they catch a 6th one, that will result in a new citation. So we give them examples of they could go ahead and catch 2 lane snappers, mutton snapper, and then the two other ones can be lane snappers, and then that will be the end of their bag limit for the day. The responsible fishing techniques, we teach them about the catch and release etiquette, handling dangerous fish, how to dehook them. Something that we have emphasized here in South Florida is how to regulate lionfish, since it is an invasive species in Florida. So we even have a few slides on how, and I don't know if we have maybe later, I don't remember if we have it or not, but we even tell them how to catch them, how to clean them. We even give them some resources and some recipes on how to prepare them. And we also talk about how to properly take care of and how to properly dispose of their fishing gear. So here's a picture of how when we tell them how to handle the fish properly. So we tell them, they should be held horizontally with one hand supporting the belly and the other one supporting the mouth. We also teach them how to do dehooking, and here in South Florida, in Everglades National Park, it is the law to have a dehooking device. In the Atlantic, it's something new. We're in a transitionary period, but next year, everybody's going to have a dehooking device. So every time we have a class, we tell people how to use it. We actually bring a lot of these materials in the class, so they don't only have a picture on the screen, but we actually have the materials with us so they can see us handling it and actually doing it. Let's see if I can. No, I don't have much time left. So, out of the people who receive fishing citation or warning, what we have seen is that since 2008, the number of people who decide to come to the class has increased. So in 2008, only about 28% of the people decided to come to the class, and now by 2011, about 41% of people are deciding to come to the class instead. And this is not something that we're measuring. However, we do receive a lot of either emails or phone calls letting us know, thank you for telling me. I was, last week I was in the park and I had the regulations with me and I was able to avoid another citation. So they seem to really enjoy it. They seem to be very grateful by the end of the class. And even people who have been fishing for decades in South Florida, they seem to get something out of the class and be very grateful for having had the opportunity to come. So lessons learned, participants are aware that what the regulations are, but lack proper interpretation or how to apply them. And as I mentioned before, a lot of people are not originally from South Florida, so they come from different countries with different regulations. Language sometimes is an issue. And different regions have different names and different ways of naming the fish, so that seems to be an impediment when they have to interpret the violation. So another reason is that they don't typically know the basic biological or ecological reasons of why we have regulations. So that's why we stress that part. Flexibility of administering the exam, as I said, sometimes we've had to do it orally because the educational attainment of the person is, we have had a couple of participants who just couldn't read. They just couldn't read. And it was difficult for them to take the exam. However, by being flexible, they were still able to take advantage of the class. Class participants have a better response to collaborative learning, and participants' involvement is important. So during the class, before we give them the regulation, for instance, we ask them about what do they know, and they seem to find that, they seem to like that a lot. And class is not effective if presented with a punishment focus, and visuals are better than words, so we have a lot of pictures throughout the class so that they can see it. And like I said, we bring the materials, the dehooking device, and the fishing gear so they can actually see it. And I think, let's see. Yeah. I'm sorry? Okay, yeah. So finally, what we're trying to work on now is to expand the class beyond Biscayne National Park. We're actually have established some contact with some of the other agencies in the state of Florida to see if we can make this a requirement for people who are trying to obtain a fishing license. So even before they start fishing, can they take a course and get familiar with the regulations? So I think that's where we're moving towards right now. And that will be it.
Thank you, Crystal. Okay, anybody have any quick questions for Crystal? Not seeing any, Crystal, so on behalf of everybody here.
Oh, I see it. Oh, there's a couple.
Are the training materials, Crystal, that's real impressive. It looks, I want to take that class. Are the training materials something that are available for others to use and modify for other areas, or are they proprietary?
So right now, we are the only ones who have access to it. That's something that actually my husband and I have been talking about. So what if people want to do it somewhere else? Can they have free access to it? So that's something that we're actually talking about. When we created the class, the examples are easily modifiable. So if someone takes the curriculum with them, they can just go ahead and put the species that are relevant to their, and they can be done for fresh water or salt water. So we did it on that way so that it could be easily tailored to the area. Now, in regards to can people just have free access to it, all I can tell you is that we're talking about it to see how we can do it and what will be the most effective way of doing it. And something that is important is we want people to have access to it and not be a burden for them. We know that a lot of the agencies have very low budgets, so when we do it, we do not want to charge for it. We want people to have access to it. It's just we haven't talked about how we're going to make it available to other people.
Thanks.
Anybody else have a question? Okay, I think that's it, Crystal. Thank you very, very much.
And something I forgot to say, I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so I have a very thick accent, so I apologize if some of the words were a little bit hard to understand. But hopefully with the visuals, you guys were able to have a good sense of what the class is about. All right? And it was an honor and a pleasure.
Oh, presentation was excellent. We heard it loud and clear.
All right, great. Have a good one.
You too. Have a good night.